Rama said, Lord, you instruct me to abandon the ego sense and the craving that it gives rise to. If I abandon the ego sense, then surely I should also give up this body and all that is based in the ego sense. For the body and the life force rest on the support of the ego sense. When the root, the ego sense, is cut, when the tree, the body, etc., will fall, how is it possible for me to abandon the ego sense and yet live? In the last chapter we had a diatribe against craving, and it finished with Rama being admonished to cut at the very root of this ego sense with the sword of wisdom of the non-ego. Be free from fear. And these are great sounding words, and we often have in traditional spirituality, if you like, the idea that we've got to get beyond the ego. And that last statement actually is, it makes a lot of sense if you can get behind the words. Cut at the very root of this ego sense with the sword of wisdom of the non-ego. Well, the non-ego is simply awareness. That's what you resort to. That's where you let the attention reside when it's not being used to get on with its tasks. And what Rama's worried about here is this confusion about the ego sense. That the ego is what creates the body, the ego is what creates the world and all the rest of it. But the ego sense only creates notions of the world. It doesn't create the world. It only creates notions of the world, and these are what we can abandon. We can abandon our notions if we're thorough and aware enough. Vasishta replied, Rama, the abandonment of all notions, conditioning and conceptualization is said to be of two kinds. One is based on knowledge or direct realization, and the other is based on contemplation. I shall describe them to you in detail. These are two traditional ways of renunciation. You've got those who give up the notions basically because they realise that that's what they are. It's all just notions. They've stumbled on their true nature as pure awareness. And then you'll get those that perhaps come across the teachings, formulations expressed by people like that, and it makes some sort of sense and they want to realise it for themselves. So let's see what Vasishta's got to say. One should become aware of one's deluded notion in which one thinks that I belong to these objects of the world and my life depends upon them. I cannot live without them and they cannot exist without me either. Then by profound inquiry one contemplates, I do not belong to these objects, nor do these objects belong to me. Thus, abandoning the ego sense through intense contemplation, one should playfully engage oneself in the actions that happen naturally, but with the heart and mind ever cool and tranquil. Such an abandonment of the ego sense and the conditioning is known as the contemplative egolessness. Do you think that's possible? Do you think it's possible for the ego to abandon itself by considering notions of egolessness? I think it's far more likely that the ego sense will be subtly enhanced by considering such notions. Sometimes you find that the most spiritual people are actually got the most massive ego sense. They might come across as quite charismatic and vibrant individuals, but when you start hanging around them a little bit, you start finding things aren't quite what they should be, and you get a few shocks as to what they're really like. And they generally have rather massive egos. And that's because they've found a teaching, spiritual teaching, which they've got some rapport with. It's probably along the lines of what I said in the previous chapter. They've been looking for a belief. They've been looking for beliefs to hang on to. People that look for beliefs, either religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs, whatever, these are expressions of craving. These are expressions of the ego sense, and trying to make sense of a spiritual teaching so that you can say, this is what I believe, this is where I'm at. To give yourself a sense of identity, a sense of moral rectitude perhaps. So I think this way of renunciation based on contemplation is rather suspect. When there is knowledge or direct experience of the non-dual truth, one abandons the ego sense and conditioning and entertains no feeling of this is mine, even with regard to the body. This is known as direct realization of egolessness. And I would say it's the only way, is the only realization of egolessness possible. It's the difference between being a seeker and being one who's realized. The one that's doing the contemplation is seeking liberation. And I suspect is unlikely to find it through these means. And the latter is one that's realized their nature. There's no dispute here. It seems to be a false classification. He is liberated even while living who playfully abandons the ego sense through the contemplative mind. He who uproots this ego sense completely by the direct experience is established in equanimity. He is liberated. Janaka and others like him follow the contemplative method. Others who have the direct experience of egolessness are one with Brahman and have risen beyond body consciousness. However, both of them are liberated and both have become one with Brahman. I think this passage is confused. I don't think we've got the real Vasishta talking here. We haven't got the guru of the Yoga Vasishta school. You cannot abandon the ego sense through contemplation. You can certainly use contemplation after you've attained realization to deal with the latent tendencies which take you away from realization. That's when contemplation has some kind of use. But contemplation without realization is just subtle ego play. And Janaka, that we heard about recently, it seemed to me he was described even as having had this realization of Brahman. It fell into his lap. That was the phrase used. He had an instantaneous realization of Brahman, and that's the only way that you can have a realization of Brahman. You stumble on it, it's like finding the light switch in the dark room. So Janaka and others like him did not follow the contemplative method. After he had his instantaneous realization, which was the point of the story, then we get his contemplations, his contemplation on the world and on self, the self. He is considered a liberated sage who is not swayed by the desirable and the undesirable, who lives in this world and functions, though inwardly totally untouched by the world, as if he's in deep sleep. As the sage Vasishta said this, another day came to an end, the assembly dispersed. I have no doubt this is a symposium. We've got this gathering of gurus, sages and students. They are the contributors to the Yoga Vasishta. Some of these contributors have got the words, have got a certain intellectual understanding, but they have not realized Brahman. Otherwise we would not get the confusion that was apparent in this chapter. But again, that's just my opinion.